Welcome to A Night for Truth, the life and work of Dietrich von Hildebrand, the great 20th century Catholic philosopher and theologian. We have been speaking for a number of sessions now with Dietrich von Hildebrand's wife, Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, whom we have with us today. We have come actually through a somewhat hair-raising part of Dietrich von Hildebrand's life, the 20s and 30s in Germany, when, of course, he not only needed to make some very difficult decisions as to how he was going to respond to the rise of National Socialism, that is to say, Nazism, but found himself on a most wanted list of arch enemies whom Adolf Hitler wanted his Gestapo to chase down and, as they used to say, liquidate. As it happens, in the middle of all this chaos, Dietrich von Hildebrand wrote, and Dr. von Hildebrand here will tell us the circumstances of it, what for me was a major milestone in my own spiritual pilgrimage. It was his great book, Transformation in Christ, which I have here with me. If I could have written that in 5 years of isolation off in the Alps somewhere, I would have felt as though I had achieved something. He wrote it essentially under the gun, we might say. And it is one of the richest books. I certainly would put it at the very top of the list of all the books I have read in my whole life. And I'm a professor of English, so my job is reading books. And yet this I would put at the very top. So, Dr. von Hildebrand, can you tell us about how this book came to be and the circumstances?
And first of all, let me thank you for the beautiful words you spoke about this book, which has changed my life. The first time that I met my husband, he was a refugee, lived in a slummy apartment on 448 Central Park West, fairly close to Harlem, not a very elegant part of New York City, and he was giving a talk. And the topic of his talk was the first chapter of Transformation in Christ, the readiness to change. And that overwhelmed me completely and totally. Now, what most people do not know, many know that it is a great book. Some people have read it. I wish that everybody would read it. It's been in press. It is printed by Sophia Institute Press in Manchester. What people do not know is the genesis of this book. As I have related in previous programs, in 1933, he moved to Vienna and he founded an anti-Nazi, anti-communist magazine. And as I hinted in my last program, this was absorbing his time and energy to such an extent that he totally had to deny, to sacrifice his philosophical work. That was his joy. Because, he could write one book after another with delight. He had no time. He was running after money. He was making sure that good articles were printed. He was relying on collaborators that were not always collaborating. And it goes on and on and on. And his life was absolutely exhausting. And he just had no time for what he considered to be his joy, to write about the transformation of man in Christ. He wrote 67 articles against Nazism. And it is my most ardent wish that someone will understand the importance of publishing and printing these articles in the English language, because it is a glorious testimony of what a Roman Catholic did when many people that should have spoken eloquently were silent in defense of Roman Catholicism, and to show that Roman Catholicism could not accept any form of anti-Semitism, that Roman Catholicism in its very essence was opposed to the philosophy of Nazism and communism. That was his one mission. As I said, his life in Vienna was so exhausting, but during the summer, twice in a row, in 36 and 37, he was invited by a group of German friends to meet him in Florence and to give talks that they missed dearly, because when he was in Munich, he was always attracting people. You know, he was such a powerful personality that wherever he went, people flocked around him. And he had a large number of friends in Munich, and he was talking to them about the lives of saints or the liturgy, whatever it might be. And they missed him so dreadfully. And they invited him, because he could not afford to pay so by himself, to go to Florence. They rented the house in which he was born. There were about 30 people there. And for 2 summers in a row, he wrote Transformation Christ. That is to say, there were 17 talks given in a period of 13 months or something of the sort, in which he went back to his one great love, to be transformed in Christ. Now, in order to shed light upon this remarkable and amazing accomplishment, you have to, oh yes, something that I have to add. Why did he meet these people in Florence? Because Hitler, furious at the opposition that Dollfuss had put against his regime, decided that every German vacationing in Austria had to pay 1,000 mark in order to re-enter Germany. That was at that time a huge amount of money.
This would stop the flow of German tourists
and simultaneously ruin the Austrian economy, because Austria is such a beautiful country that, of course, people love to go there. So this is why they met in Florence. You could go to Italy and go back and not pay a penny. Now, what is interesting is the following. When you are so totally absorbed by a newspaper, running after money, finding the right collaborator, establishing contacts, defending it, so on and so on, somehow you feel your religious life is inevitably going to be pushed into the background. And the good excuse is, I have no time. Now, in my husband's philosophy, there is a concept that I have to explain to you, because he introduced a word which, to my mind, has never been used by philosophers before. And I'm going to try my best to explain it to you. And if I don't succeed, well, just tell me you're a bad teacher, try to do it better next time, and I'll try again. He makes a distinction between what he calls actual and super-actual. Now, you look in the dictionary, you're not going to find any sort of explanation. Even the best philosophical dictionary is not going to shed light on what he means by these terms. Let me try to make it simple. Right now, what is in the actual forefront of my consciousness? I have the joy of being at EWTN, which to me is always a sursum corda. I have the immense joy of talking about my husband. I'm particularly grateful to my friend Tom Howard, who is assisting me in doing this work. This is what is happening in my consciousness right now. But, says my husband, a human being a person, does not just live in the moment. There are lots of valid realities that remain in the background of my consciousness, fully there and fully alive, but the light of consciousness is not shed on them at that particular moment. For example, when I'm talking to you, and I'm talking about my husband, and I'm talking about his dramatic fight against Nazism, back of my consciousness, I know that I'm a child of God. I know that I have the blessing of being baptized. I know that unworthy as I am, I'm a member of the Holy Catholic Church. I know that I'm a woman. I know that I married an extraordinary man, whom I have the honor of calling my husband. I know that I have some very great friendships in my life. I know that I have a passionate love for classical music, and so on and so on. Now, even though I'm not concerned about these things right now, nevertheless, it is fully valid there. Meaning to say that even though, for reasons of time, I cannot concentrate on them, nevertheless, they are not asleep. They are fully valid. It's simply the light of consciousness is not shed on them at present.
For your consolation, I might say you are, in fact, a very good teacher, which I have known all along, but I wanted to give a chance for everyone to see that you are. I can't imagine anyone being confused at all by the distinction you've just made between that which is what we might call front and center, or visible, or immediate, or your immediate circumstances, but that entire backdrop which constitutes you and all that you are and all that you believe and has happened to you and so on is the superactual. It's always there, whether you're here at
fully valid.
EWTN or on an airplane.
No, once I read something that touched me very deeply. You know, I do a lot of spiritual reading. And once I read, I've forgotten where, that someone wrote, a very holy man or priest, when the Holy Virgin was asleep, she was praising God more than any saint could have done, spending his night in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Because the supernatural love of God in her mind and soul was so much there that even though, being asleep, she was not concentrated on it, nevertheless it was praising God. And this I find something so incredibly beautiful.
The superactual for her was to
so
be
actual,
gratia plena.
Absolutely.
In all circumstances. Yeah.
No, you see, from this point of view, suppose that you take the question of euthanasia. This just comes to my mind right now. If the person in a coma is a profound, devoted Christian who knows that to love God is the most important thing in life, even in his coma he can still praise God. You know, and the stupidity is to say, now look, it's unconscious, nothing is happening. This is something that we do not know, and I claim it is fully there. And I'm going to prove it in the most touching, moving way when I come to another talk that we're going to do on gratitude, to show you how my husband's faith was supernatural in there, so rooted in him that even in moment of dying, it still came out. So even though you have to realize from October 33 until March 38, when he escaped miraculously, as I said in my last program, the super-actual reality of his faith, of his love for the church, of his passion for truth, of his horror. You know, you can truly see the second part of the book should be, he hated iniquity. All this was so fully alive in his soul that when he went to Florence and all of a sudden, for 4 weeks, could lay down the burden because he considered his work in Vienna to be a cross, in this very moment it blossomed. In other words, even though he wasn't concerned about it, even though he had no time to do any sort of spiritual reading, nevertheless it was growing in his soul.
So that we could say actually that this book, Transformation in Christ, arose from or blossomed from the superactual which was in him, even though his immediate circumstances were turbulent and helter-skelter and dangerous, yet he was able to come up with this in the midst of that.
No, I do not know whether I have mentioned in a previous program that his love for the church, which he identified with Christ, was so ardent, so passionate, in the noblest sense of this term, that after his conversion, his spiritual director thought that he was a little bit too enthusiastic. You know, it's very much like someone falling in love, and wherever he goes, he says, and my fiancée is so lovely, and she's so charming, and she's so witty, and she's so intelligent, and then finally people say, well, tone it down, you know, we get it. You know, and the person never tires of doing so because, you know, his soul is singing, and he just has to manifest it in words. I'm going to say something which I believe is unique in the history of mankind. I never heard anything like that. Maybe it is not, but in my experience it is unique. He was converted in 14. In 1915 came the first Lent. And he went to spiritual director and he said, Father, what should I do for Lent? Unfortunately, he was a smoker. At least he was for quite a while. And he expected his superior director to say, well, abstain from smoking or curtail your food, because he truly was someone who enjoyed good food enormously. what did he hear? And forbid you for 40 days to mention the Holy Catholic Church or religion.
Good heavens.
When you hear something like that, you just say to yourself, that cannot be.
I think I would have protested to his spiritual director that the rest of us had to pay the price for that, because Dietrich von Hildebrand wasn't speaking about the church.
No, he said,
and therefore I would have been deprived.
Yes, but simultaneously he's going to say, you are shedding too much water on young plants. You know, I mean, in other words, you have to control your enthusiasm. But I mean, this is something which is so amazing. You don't know whether you have to laugh or cry. But that, he said to me, that was a fearful sacrifice. But he obeyed. Now, what happened on Easter Sunday, I do not know. Probably there was some sort of flooding.
He awoke at midnight and started with the cock crowing.
But you must admit, these are little episodes in my husband's life that nobody knows. But they're very unique. They're truly very, very special.
And very revealing.
I prohibit you to speak about the Holy Catholic Church or religion. Now, there he was in Florence. And I don't know, it was 4 weeks. I believe he had 4 weeks vacation. Yeah. And the whole day long, the whole day long he worked. And at night, day after day, he was giving a talk. And these talks were typed then by these Germans. And when the manuscript was completed, my husband offered it to Benziger in Switzerland. Obviously, the work could not be published in Germany because my husband's name was taboo. Austria was a very small country, so it was a Swiss publisher, Benziger, in Einsiedel, who was interested in it. And they printed it in 1940 under a pseudonym. Oh. And why a pseudonym? Because they knew that by now my husband's name was so detested. Personally, Hitler knew personally that he was his enemy number one in Austria.
Hitler had named him,
of course. No, it was the German ambassador in Austria writing a top secret document to Hitler. I have the document, by the way, referring to my husband as the arch enemy of Nazism in Austria. So obviously, had the book been printed under his name, it could not have sold in Germany. It would have been simply, and so he was published under the name Peter Ott, O-T-T, and I still have a copy of Peter Ott. Now, some of his friends immediately identified his style and recognized it, but the book was doing relatively well in Germany because they didn't know that it was written by Dietrich von Hildebrand. And it's only after the war in 45 or 46 that they reprinted it under his name. Now, this book, which has meant so much in my life, that it is my deepest wish that some of the viewers would read it 1 page a day. I think it only took you 1 year to read the book from cover to cover.
Oh, I couldn't read more than, I was going to say 1 chapter a day. It was less than that.
Well, a chapter a day, that would be 17 days. That's not very long.
Yes, but it's right. It's divided into very neat paragraphs here, and
that's in English.
Yes, very often, and if the viewers could see these pages, they are heavily underlined, and the back flyleaf is full of my little jottings and notations. Very often, I would find myself with one sentence that set me to mulling and reflecting, and I found it was as much as I could cope with for that day.
But when you say as much as I can cope with, it doesn't mean that the book is ununderstandable.
Not at all.
It doesn't mean that it has one of the peculiarities of some German books, and I could be more precise.
Hegel.
It's just so complicated that it gives you a headache and you've got to stop.
No.
Or, the tragic mistake which is often made of in Germany, of believing that because something is incomprehensible or very, very difficult, it must be deep. And sometimes it covers up stupidity and
interestingly enough,
confusion.
Interestingly enough, that is one of the specific points that your husband makes and he demonstrates it in his style. There is nothing crotchety or polysyllabic or hopelessly complicated that an ordinary reader cannot follow. As a matter of fact, the problem is it's altogether too clear and it hits home. One is never lost in the scholarly weeds, shall we say, in this book. And he actually makes the point in one of the chapters that there's a certain pleasure in complicating things needlessly, because that very often can cover my responsibility for something. If I talk about it in polysyllabic terms or psychobabble, then all of a sudden it takes on a life of its own, and I am not responsible, and he just cuts through that.
Having taught for so long, sometimes have made very funny experiences. And I recall one of my students praising another professor of philosophy that I think very highly of. I mean, basically, he was not a philosopher, but for political reason he had been appointed. And she said to me, you know, he starts moving upward and upward, and no one knows what he's talking about. I'm so impressed.
That is the diametric opposite from your husband's work.
No, you see, there maybe I can say something which is challenging. He was German. His father was German and Swiss. His mother was full German. But he was born and raised in Italy. Now, if there is something that I can say about Latin countries, whether it is France or the Spain or the Italy, there is a certain clarity about the language. There is a hatred of unnecessary complications. You know, if you compare a French text to a German text, what is luminous in French could not become a bit complicated in German, because they have this passion of throwing the verb at the very end of the sentence. And if the sentence is about this long, by the time you have read the sentence and found the verb, you have to reread the whole thing.
Start over.
So, as a matter of fact, I knew a young Jesuit priest, an Austrian, who read Kant in French, because it was easier to understand. So therefore my husband benefited from his Latin background, you know, because he lived in Italy for so long, and simultaneously for the profundity of the German mind. You see, Germans are never superficial. They always aim at something which is deep, and the tragedy is that some of them, not the best, confuse depth and complexity. And when something is truly complex, then they are impressed. Whereas a French person would start, you know, telling jokes. I mean, this is so complicated, it doesn't make any sense to me. You see, it's very interesting from this point of view to compare the two types of mentality. And it seems to me that because of his background, he managed to combine the best of both. So there is the richness of German thought and simultaneously the clarity of Latin countries, a sort of luminous clarity, and in French, for example, is incredibly clear and logical, and you know, it's quite an intellectual effort for someone raised in French to learn German, because, I mean, so to speak, you have to strain your mind, you know, and to teach him to make acrobatics, which are not necessary in French, because it's also clear.
Yes.
So, you know, maybe what we should do now is to turn to chapter number 1. And for some reason I have a particular love for chapter number 1, because these are the first words I heard from my husband's mouth.
And the very title of it in English, I'm not sure whether this is the title in German, but the title in English brings a reader who might be just casually looking at it, you know, and all of a sudden you see the title of the first chapter, and it's The Readiness to Change. And you're halfway tempted to, well, that's not a book I want to, I'm not quite sure I'm ready.
You know, this is the introduction to his fundamental view that the supernatural operates a radical change in human life. You know, as I told you 2 or 3 times, he was a youth protected by grace. You know, you can truly say certainly there were flaws and there were mistakes and certainly there were some sort of sins. But all in all, he was so protected by grace, he led a good life. And simultaneously, when he converted, he discovered an overwhelmingly different reality that not only transcended what he had perceived on a natural level, but simultaneously fulfilled it. So one of the great theses, and this is going to come back throughout his life, far as we can go on a purely natural basis, I mean, you take a noble personality like Socrates, there are limits. Number one, because there are certain things that you do not see. Number two, because every natural virtue is in some way imperfect and crippled. And I see that more and more in life, that I know people that are truly good people, and kind, and so on and so on. And then all of a sudden, something happens, and you realize that there are limits to their goodness, or limits to their generosity, and all of a sudden you see that unless, now let me say this emphatically, unless every natural virtue is baptized, it is in some way tainted.
Now,
it's in some way imperfect.
With that sentence, we must end this conversation, but it's a perfect one. Unless every natural virtue is baptized, it is in some sense tainted. Thank you for joining us on A Night for Truth. We are just now beginning to step into the great sea of Dietrich von Hildebrand's wonderful work, Transformation in Christ. We hope you will join us again with Dr. Alice von Hildebrand, who speaks with great authority and clarity about her husband's work and his life and the extraordinary circumstances of how his work came to be in the middle of a most dangerous and turbulent life. Thank you.